Greetings, chess players. I'm Rom from the Crescent Knights Chess Academy, and today I'm going to be bringing you my notation guide. So, first you might be asking, what is chess notation? Well, I'm glad you asked. Notation is like the language of chess. It is a succinct method of describing each move to better keep track of what is happening in a game or just the current position. Notation is an essential skill for anyone who wants to improve their chess. If a person doesn't understand notation, it makes learning anything but the basic rules of chess much more difficult. So, how does it work? Well, in order to notate any chess move, you must first ask yourself two questions. Who is moving, and where are they going? Now, when I asked who is moving, I'm not referring to you or your opponent, I'm talking about the pieces on the board. What piece is moving, and what square they are going to. Keep both of these questions in mind as we dive into the specifics. Each chess piece has a letter that represents them in chess notation. R is for rook, we use N for knight because the letter K is already taken by the king. B is for bishop, Q is for queen, K is for king, and you'd think pawn would be P, but we actually don't use a letter for the pawn. One way you can conceptualize it is just to imagine that the pawn is being represented by something that's invisible. The board. As you can see, a chessboard is an 8x8 grid with 64 squares. The rows are numbered from 1 to 8, and the columns are lettered from A to H. The rows on our chessboard are called ranks, and we refer to the columns as files. The white pieces are set up on the first and second ranks, and the black pieces start on the 7th and 8th ranks. When you talk about the name of a square, you say what file it's on first, then you say the rank it's in. For example, the white square in the bottom right-hand corner of the board is called H1 because it is on the H file and part of the first rank. Now, let's look at some example moves. So here we have a position with a bishop on A1. We want to move this bishop to the G7 square. So, answering the questions, who would be the bishop, and where would be G7? Hence, we get the move, bishop G7. Alright, let's look at another example. So, here we have a queen on E1 that's going to take the pawn on E7. When you notate a capture, you put an X between the who and the where. So, queen takes E7. In this example, the knight on C6 is going to move to E5. So who would be the C knight? Where would be E5? And so the move is knight from C to E5. The reason we have to have the little C in there is because the knight from G4 could also move to E5. So we need to clear up any confusion. Because if we just wrote knight E5, then it could be either knight, and we wouldn't know. So here we have another ambiguous example. In this example, the knight from C6 is also moving to E5, but the problem is that the other knight is also on the C file. So if we say knight C to E5, it's still ambiguous because you don't know which knight is moving. So we clear that up by calling it the 6th knight, or the knight on the 6th rank. So the move is knight from 6 to E5. Here's another example. When a move is check, you put a plus at the end of the move. So in this example, we have a queen on H2 that's going to go to H8 to check the black king. Who would be the queen, where would be H8, and hence queen H8 check. Checkmate is notated similarly to check, but instead of using a plus, we use a hashtag. In this example, we have a queen on B2 that's going to deliver checkmate to the black king by moving to B8. Who would be the queen, where would be B8, hence queen B8 checkmate. Now let's take a look at those pawn moves that I was telling you about earlier. We want to move the H pawn from H5 to H6. So who would be the H pawn? Where would be H6? And then the move is notated as H6. Remember, we don't use a letter for pawn, so the move is just notated as H6. Nothing before or after it. Let's look at pawn captures. So in this example, the pawn on H6 is going to capture the knight on G7. So, the H pawn is the who, where is G7, and you'd think it'd be, just captures G7 because we don't have a letter for pawn. But that could get kind of confusing because in this example, there's two pawns that could capture on G7. So, we use the file that the pawn is on. So, it is notated as H captures G7. Let's look at the final pawn example. Promotion. We want to promote the G pawn by moving it to G8 and making it a queen. So the who would be the G pawn, where would be G8, And there's a bunch of different ways you could notate a promotion, and they're all acceptable. G8 equals queen, G8 slash queen, or just G8 queen. However, there is one way that is unacceptable to notate a promotion, and that would be queen G8. You cannot say queen G8 because that would mean that the queen on C8 is going to G8, and it would be very confusing. So, let's look at castling. Here we have a position in which black could castle either kingside or queenside. The pawns are just here for decoration, don't let that confuse you. By the way, guys, do you know what opening this pawn structure is from? Let us know down in the comments below, and if you guess it right, we'll let you know. So anyways, back to castling. Castling kingside is notated as 0-0, and castling queenside is notated as 0-0-0. A good way to remember which is which is to think about the number of squares that the rook moves. Because when you castle kingside, the rook moves 2 squares, hence 2 zeros. When you castle queenside, the rook moves 3 squares, hence 3 zeros. Here is a short sample game demonstrating the notation concepts we went over in this video. This was a game played between Charles Ambrose Scott Dumont and an unknown opponent. This game was played in London in 1932. Dumont was playing white and he opened with e4. His opponent replied with c6, the Caro-Kann defense. White pushes d4 to establish more control over the center. Black replies with d5, challenging white's center, forcing white to either take the pawn, advance the pawn, or protect the pawn, usually with something like knight c3. In this game, white plays bishop d3, defending the pawn. Nowadays, knight c3 is more common. Black makes a bad move here. Instead of playing d takes e4 like he should, he plays knight f6. This allows white to just push e5 and force the knight to retreat. Although g8 was a better retreating square, black retreats the knight by playing knight from f to d7. It's knight f d7 because there's a knight on b8 that could also go to d7. So the f clears up ambiguity. However, the knight going to d7 blocks on the bishop and turns out to be a really bad choice because white can just play e6 in order to open up black's king. Taking the e6 pawn will lead to checkmate, so black's best option is to rescue his knight and allow white to take on f7. And black does take it. With all these mistakes that black is making, it's no wonder that nobody knows who this guy is. He's unknown for a good reason. White can now checkmate black by playing queen h5 check, notice the plus because it's check, and then after g6, black's only response, white can now sacrifice his queen by playing queen captures g6. Bishop takes g6 first also works, but sacking the queen is more stylish. This is also check, so the plus, and then black is forced to play h captures g6 to get rid of the check, and then white can finish with a beautiful bishop takes g6 checkmate. The king has no escape squares because the knight, queen, and bishop, and pawn all block the king in, while the bishop covers f7 and checks the enemy king to create checkmate. Notice that the moves are divided into a column of white's moves and a column of black's moves. This is how a notation sheet is organized. I hope you enjoyed this notation guide. Tell us what you think down in the comments section below. If you did enjoy the video, consider subscribing to the channel for more awesome chess videos just like this one. If you'd like to take lessons from me or any of our other wonderful instructors at Crescent Knights Chess, sign-ups are in the description. Have a nice day, everyone!